40% of trafficking victims are first sold by a family member. But what happens when the crime lord they're sold to isn't the monster they expected? This story begins with a violent stepfather's ultimate betrayal, a girl traded like property, and a criminal empire where the most dangerous thing wasn't the man in charge. It was the truth she discovered inside. We are about to dissect one of the most disturbing and underreported crimes in the world, where the monsters aren't strangers in shadows, but the very people who are supposed to offer safety. How does a child survive when their protector becomes their trafficker? And what happens when the criminal empire they're sold into holds the key to their escape? This is the story of familial trafficking, a billion-dollar shadow economy where love is weaponized and survival demands the unthinkable. To understand how it starts, we have to go back to the beginning, to the quiet suburban home where the nightmare was born. Her name was Maya, and her nightmare didn't start in a dark alley. It started in a perfectly ordinary kitchen, with the smell of microwave dinners and the sound of her stepfather's keys hitting the counter. After her mother's death, the man she was told to call Dad became her sole guardian. The abuse began subtly, a comment about her appearance, a hand that lingered too long. She was just 11 years old. Studies show the average age for victims of familial trafficking is 11.5. By 12, the emotional manipulation had a price tag. He'd come home smelling of cheap beer and cheaper decisions, complaining about debts to people she'd never met. One night, he told her she needed to help the family. He called it a favor, he called it duty. The first time he brought a friend over, a man who stared at her throughout dinner, she was told to be polite, to be grateful for the attention. The transaction wasn't cash. It was a forgiven debt, a favor returned. This is the grim reality of familial trafficking. The initial exchange is rarely a dramatic sale. It's a slow erosion, a twisted economy of obligation where a child's safety is currency. The dependency and emotional attachment make detection nearly impossible because the victim's survival is tied to the very person exploiting them. Maya learned to dissociate, to float outside her own body while it was used. The house she grew up in became a prison, and her stepfather was both warden and auctioneer. For 3 years, this was her world, a rotating cast of men, all friends or business associates, all with debts that needed settling. Her stepfather's network grew, and so did his ambitions. The favors were no longer enough. He wanted a bigger score, a permanent solution to his financial chaos. That's when he started talking about the man they called the contractor. He wasn't some cartoonish mobster. He was a legitimate businessman on paper. He owned shipping warehouses, a chain of laundromats, and had political connections. His criminal empire was built on a foundation of plausible deniability. The stepfather saw him as the ultimate mark. He bragged that he had a premium product, young, controllable, and broken in. Maya was 15 when the meeting was set. She was dressed up, her stepfather forcing her into a dress that was too old for her, applying makeup to cover the bruises. He gave her a script: be charming, be quiet, do exactly as you're told. They drove to a nondescript office building downtown. The waiting room was cold, all glass and steel. This is where the story should turn into a simple horror story. But here's the first twist that challenges everything we think we know about monsters. When the office door opened, the man who walked out wasn't what she expected. He was in his late 40s, sharp, but there was no leering menace. He looked at her stepfather with pure, unadulterated disgust. He dismissed him with a hand wave, telling his assistant to take the man to discuss numbers. Then he turned to Maya. He looked at her, not at her body, but at her eyes, at the fear she couldn't hide. And he did something unimaginable. He asked her if she wanted a cup of tea. The psychological playbook of traffickers involves isolation, drug dependency, and blackmail. But the contractor broke the script. In his private office, he didn't touch her. He asked her name, her real name. He asked about school, about what she liked to read, while her stepfather was in another room signing away her life. She was too terrified to answer. He simply nodded and said, "You're safe in this room." When her stepfather returned, smirking, clutching a sealed envelope, the contractor's demeanor shifted to ice. He laid out the new terms. Maya would come work for him. She would live in a secure apartment he owned. She would not be touched by him or by anyone else. Her stepfather's access to her was permanently, irrevocably severed. In exchange, the stepfather's debts were cleared, and he would receive a modest monthly stipend to keep him quiet and far away. It was a buyout. The stepfather, seeing only the money and an easier exit, agreed instantly. He left without looking back at Maya. She was now the property of a crime lord, but as the door closed, the contractor let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. He looked at the terrified girl in his office and said, "My name is Leo, and I am going to tell you a story about my sister." The story he told her that afternoon would rewrite her understanding of evil. 20 years prior, his younger sister had been trafficked by an abusive boyfriend. She disappeared into a network that Leo, despite his growing power, couldn't penetrate in time. They found her body 2 years later. His entire criminal empire, he explained, was built with a singular, secret purpose: to infiltrate and dismantle trafficking rings from the inside. The laundromats cleaned money, but also provided jobs for survivors. The shipping warehouses moved goods, but also housed safe rooms. He wasn't a saint. He was a ruthless businessman who dealt in contraband and coercion. But he had one absolute non-negotiable rule: no exploitation of children. He used his illicit wealth and influence to gather intelligence, to buy out contracts from low-level traffickers like her stepfather, and to provide sanctuary. Maya wasn't his victim. She was his intelligence asset and his personal redemption. For the first month, she lived in a state of suspended disbelief. The apartment was clean, quiet, and locked from the outside, but food was delivered, books appeared, and a female doctor came to check on her health. She was given a tutor. Leo visited once a week, never alone, always with a female bodyguard present. He asked questions. He wanted every detail about her stepfather's friends, their names, their cars, their habits. He was mapping a network. She realized she was in a gilded cage, but the cage was protecting her from the wolf. She started to talk. She gave him everything, and with each piece of information, she saw a fire ignite behind his calm eyes. This was the man her stepfather sold her to, a man who calculated rescue like a business merger and vengeance like a long-term investment. But this delicate, dangerous arrangement was built on a powder keg. Because Leo had powerful enemies within his own organization who didn't share his secret morals, and they were about to discover that the new girl in the locked apartment wasn't just another piece of inventory. She was a witness, and she was talking. The first sign that the cage had cracks was the new guard. His eyes didn't glance away when she entered a room. They tracked her, calculating like he was inventorying parts. Leo called him Sealers, his head of security. Where Leo was controlled intensity, Sealers was coiled violence. He didn't like the new arrangement. He questioned why resources were being spent on a girl who generated no income. Leo's explanation that she was valuable intelligence only held for so long. Sealers began auditing the safe houses, questioning the monthly stipends paid to survivors, connecting dots that Leo had carefully kept scattered. The Empire had two hearts now, one beating for a secret redemption and the other pounding for pure, profit-driven power, and they were on a collision course. Maya's world became a tense performance. During the day, she studied with her tutor, a retired teacher named Elena who asked no questions but offered quiet kindness. In the afternoons, she met with Leo, reviewing photos, describing voices, building a dossier on her stepfather's network. But Sealers was always nearby, a shadow in the doorway, listening. One afternoon, Leo was called away abruptly. Sealers lingered. He leaned against the doorframe, his gaze a physical weight. "He thinks he's saving you," Sealers said, his voice low. "But you know what you really are to this business? A liability, a charity case in a world that eats charity cases for breakfast." He pushed off the frame and walked to the window, looking down at the city. "My operation moves 50 women a month. Young, pretty, willing after the right persuasion. That's a revenue stream. You're a drain, and drains get plugged." That night, the locks on her apartment door clicked differently. She tested it, still locked from the outside. But the sound was wrong, a heavier, final sound. The next morning, her usual guard was gone, replaced by two of Sealers' men. The books stopped coming. The tutor didn't arrive. She was placed on a strict schedule, meals delivered at specific times, 1 hour of supervised yard time on the barren rooftop. The isolation was tactical, a classic trafficker method to induce dependency and disorientation. Leo visited less frequently, and when he did, Sealers was with him, his presence a clear message: you are being watched. The gilded cage was becoming a concrete box. Turning point came 3 weeks later. Sealers entered her apartment alone. He didn't sit. He placed a file on the table. "Leo's sister," he said, tapping the folder. "Anna, found in a river with enough heroin in her system to kill 3 people. The official report said overdose." Leo spent $200,000 of the organization's money on private investigators to prove it was murder. He never got his proof, just an empty bank account and a vendetta that's now costing us millions. He opened the file showing crime scene photos, a young woman, her face peaceful in death. This is his weakness, this sentiment. And you, he looked at Maya, you are now the embodiment of that weakness. He sees her in every girl he saves. But this isn't a fairy tale, this is a business, and I have shareholders to answer to. He laid out his ultimatum. Leo was becoming a problem. His secret project was diverting funds and attention from their core, lucrative enterprises, drugs, arms, and yes, the trafficking of adults. Sealers proposed a restructuring. Maya had a choice. She could help him convince Leo to step back, to focus on the profitable arms of the business and abandon his rescue mission. Or Sealers would be forced to remove the problem himself. The threat wasn't veiled. Removal in this world had one meaning. He wasn't asking her to betray Leo out of malice. He was offering her a chance to save him by convincing him to give up the one thing that gave his criminal life meaning. The psychological manipulation was exquisite. He was making her responsible for Leo's survival. Here, where the reality of familial trafficking trauma created an unexpected weapon for Sealers, studies show approximately 60% of victims continue to have contact with their trafficker into adulthood, bound by trauma bonds and twisted loyalty. Maya, despite everything, still felt a pull to her stepfather. It wasn't love, it was a sickening familiarity, the devil she knew. Sealers had done his homework. A few days after his ultimatum, a smartphone was delivered with her dinner. On it was a single contact, "Dad." A text popped through, "Heard you're doing well, proud of you, we should talk." Her stepfather, Sealers had found him and likely paid him to re-establish contact. The message was clear: you can go back to the old devil or you can watch the new one be destroyed. Your choice. Maya was trapped in a psychological vice. Trust the crime lord with a savior complex who was losing control of his own empire, or succumb to the man who had sold her, now dangling the perverse comfort of familiar abuse. She made a desperate play. During her next supervised rooftop hour, she managed to slip a note, folded tiny, to Elena the tutor, who still came twice a week under Sealers' suspicious gaze. The note had just 3 words: Sealers knows, help. She didn't know if Elena was loyal to Leo, to Sealers, or just to her paycheck. She was gambling with the only currency she had left, someone's latent conscience. The gamble seemed to fail. For 2 days, nothing happened. The silence was worse than any confrontation. Then on the 3rd night, her apartment door opened. It wasn't a guard. It was Leo alone, and he looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. "We have to move now," he said, his voice stripped of its usual calm. He told her Sealers had intercepted the note. Elena had been questioned and then dismissed, but the note itself had forced Sealers' hand. He was moving tonight to consolidate power. Leo's safe houses were being raided by his own men. The survivors were being relocated, a euphemism that turned Leo's face to ash. "I miscalculated," he said, the admission costing him dearly. "I thought I could fix one evil by controlling a bigger one, but the evil just wears your face after a while." He had an escape route, a single safe location even Sealers didn't know about, a decommissioned church his sister had loved. But getting there meant crossing the city, with Sealers' network hunting for both of them. He handed Maya a hoodie and a pair of jeans. "You can come with me, and we try to outrun this, or I can give you cash and a direction, and you run alone. But you cannot stay here. In 5 hours, this apartment won't exist." Maya looked at the man who bought her, protected her, and then failed to protect his own secret. The crime lord who wasn't a monster, but whose humanity had become his greatest vulnerability. She pulled on the hoodie. The choice was made. But as they slipped into the service elevator, heading down into the garage, a chilling thought crystallized. Sealers had anticipated this. He wanted Leo to run. Because a moving target, especially one dragging a liability, is easier to eliminate in the chaotic dark than in a fortified high-rise. They weren't escaping. They were walking right into the second, deadliest phase of the trap. The garage wasn't empty. A black sedan idled in the far corner, its exhaust painting ghosts in the cold air. Sealers leaned against the hood, cleaning his fingernails with a knife. He hadn't been waiting. He'd been letting them think they had a chance. Leo froze, his hand moving instinctively to push Maya behind him, but Sealers just smiled, a thin, joyless stretch of lips. "The church, Leo? Really? Anna's old sanctuary? Sentimentality will get you killed every time, he knew. He'd known the entire escape plan because Leo's grief had made him predictable. The safe house was compromised before they'd even left the building. But Silas didn't give the order to attack. Instead, he tossed the knife into the air, caught it by the blade, and offered it handle first to Leo. "I'm not here to kill you, I'm here to make you an offer, one last business proposal." He gestured to the car. "Get in, both of you, we take a ride, you listen, then you decide." The choice was an illusion. The garage doors were shut, and 4 armed men materialized from behind concrete pillars. They got in the car. This was the wait, it gets worse moment, because Silas wasn't just a thug seizing power, he was a strategist executing a merger. The car didn't head to a warehouse or a ditch. It drove to a 5-star hotel. They were ushered through a private entrance to a penthouse suite where a man in an impeccable suit was waiting, sipping mineral water. He was introduced as Mr. Voss, not a crime lord, a corporate lawyer from Geneva, and he represented a consortium of investors. Here was the chilling pivot. Silas wasn't staging a coup out of greed. He was facilitating a hostile takeover. The trafficking ring, the drugs, the arms, they were all assets on a balance sheet. Leo's rescue mission was a drag on profitability, and the board, a shadowy group of international financiers, wanted it excised. Voss laid out the new corporate structure. Leo could remain as a figurehead, focusing on the legitimate shipping and laundering fronts. Silas would run the human logistics division with a mandate to double revenue. Maya and the other survivors would be reintegrated into the profitable workforce. It was business, stripped of morality, sanitized by spreadsheet. Leo refused, flatly coldly. He looked at Voss and said, "You don't own me." Voss sighed, as if disappointed by a poor quarterly report. "We own your debt, Mr. Leo. Every warehouse, every laundering route, every shell company. We financed your vengeance, and now we call the loan." He slid a folder across the table. It contained loan agreements, collateral pledges, all signed by Leo in the early, desperate years of building his empire to find his sister's killers. He had traded his soul to one devil to fight another, and now the bill was due. The revelation rewrote the past 3 years. Leo wasn't a savior playing a dangerous game. He was a bankrupt king, and his kingdom had been owned by someone else the entire time. Silas saw the defeat in Leo's eyes and pressed his advantage. He had one more piece of leverage. He nodded to one of his men who opened a connecting door. Maya's stepfather walked in, looking nervous but well-dressed in a new suit. He wouldn't meet Maya's eyes. Silas explained, "Family is such a complicated asset, but it is an asset. We've reinstated your original contract, Maya. Your stepfather has agreed to resume his managerial role. He's even been given a promotion." The stepfather finally looked at her, not with remorse but with a shrug. "It's a living," he mumbled. The betrayal was absolute. The familial bond, twisted by years of abuse, was now being weaponized by the corporate machine. The psychological torture was masterful, forcing her back under the control of the man who started it all, while making her former protector powerless to stop it. But then Leo did something unexpected. He laughed, a raw, genuine sound of disbelief. He looked at Voss, then at Silas. "You think I didn't know?" he said. "You think I built all of this without knowing who held the paper?" He reached into his own jacket and pulled out a small, encrypted flash drive. "I've known for 18 months. And for 18 months, I've been copying every transaction, every wire transfer, every encrypted chat log between your consortium and 3 separate terrorist organizations you also finance. This isn't a drive, it's a bomb, and it's wired to my heartbeat." He tapped a monitor on his wrist. "My heart stops. It gets emailed to Interpol, the FBI, and the * Financial Times *." The room went silent. Silas's smirk vanished. Voss's corporate calm cracked. Leo had turned his own body into a dead man's switch. He wasn't just a sentimental fool. He was a suicide bomber of information. "Here's my counteroffer," Leo said, his voice steady now. "You let the girl go, you leave my safe network alone, you get your profits from the other ventures, and I don't burn your entire multi-billion-dollar operation to the ground." It was a stalemate crafted from mutual destruction, but Silas hated stalemates. He looked at Maya's stepfather, then back at Leo. A new, more dangerous calculation clicked behind his eyes. Silas said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "The girl walks today, right now." He pointed to the door. Leo eyed him suspiciously. "Go ahead, Maya," Leo said, not taking his eyes off Silas. Walk out the door, take the elevator down, there's a taxi stand, go to this address. He recited a street number, a small, family-run cafe owned by a retired cop he trusted. Maya hesitated, paralyzed by the sudden turn. Go, Leo barked, the command breaking her freeze. She ran. She didn't look back. She made it to the lobby, to the street, into a cab. She gave the address. She was free. But back in the penthouse, Silas smiled again. Sentimentality, he repeated. He turned to Voss. We have a new problem. The girl has heard everything. She's a witness to this conversation, to our faces, to our deal. She's a loose end that your new CEO, he gestured to Leo, has just released into the wild. Voss understood immediately. The flash drive was a threat, but a contained one. A living witness, however, was a variable. Silas had allowed her to leave not out of mercy, but to create a justification. He turned to Leo. You see the dilemma? We can't have a witness, so we have to clean up your mess. And since you care about her, you'll help us find her. He slid a phone across the table to Leo. Call her, lure her back, or we start with her stepfather and work our way through every name on your little safe house list until you do. Leo was trapped by his own morality. His dead man's switch protected him, but it did nothing to protect the people he cared about. Silas had escalated from a corporate takeover to a campaign of targeted terror, using Leo's compassion as the weapon to break him. Leo picked up the phone, his hand trembling not from fear but from rage. He had one move left, a move so audacious it would either end the game or get everyone killed. He looked at the phone, then at Silas, and made the call. But he didn't call Maya. He dialed a number from memory, put the phone on speaker and let it ring. A voice answered, sharp and alert. Federal Bureau of Investigation Special Agent Miller. The room exploded into motion. Silas lunged. Voss cursed. And Leo, speaking quickly into the phone, uttered the phrase that would blow his world apart and launch the final act. Miller, it's Leo. I'm turning myself in, and I'm bringing you the entire network. But you have 60 minutes to extract a protected witness named Maya, or she's dead. He dropped the phone, looked at Silas's stunned face, and said, checkmate, now we all burn together. In the stunned silence that followed Leo's declaration, Silas made his last, fatal mistake. He went for his gun. He wasn't aiming at Leo. He was aiming at the phone, at the open line to the FBI. But Leo had been waiting for this. He tackled Silas as the shot went wide, shattering a vase. The two men grappled on the floor while Voss shouted for his security. But the phone was still live, and Agent Miller was already tracing the call and mobilizing a tactical team. The 60-minute clock had started. Down in the cafe, Maya sat shaking, clutching a cold cup of coffee, completely unaware that her life was now measured in minutes. The retired cop who owned the place, an old friend of Leo's named Frank, saw the fear in her eyes and locked the front door. He didn't ask questions. He just picked up a shotgun from behind the counter and said, until Leo says otherwise, nobody gets in. Up in the penthouse, the fight was short and brutal. Leo had the element of surprise and a lifetime of street brawling, but Silas had younger, trained muscle. Leo took a knife to the ribs before he managed to disarm Silas and put him in a chokehold. Voss and his security fled, leaving Silas to his fate. As Silas lost consciousness, Leo grabbed the encrypted drive from the floor and whispered, for Anna. Then he stood, bleeding, and looked at the phone. Miller, you still there? Teams are en route to your location and the cafe. Hold tight, Leo. The agent's voice was calm. Do not let that drive out of your sight. But Leo knew the real battle wasn't in this room. It was on the streets, where Silas's men would be scrambling to tie up loose ends, starting with Maya. At the 45-minute mark, two black SUVs screeched to a halt outside the cafe. Men in tactical gear, but without police markings, poured out. Frank saw them through the window. Not ours, he grunted. He pushed Maya toward a back room with a panicked door. Go, run, don't stop. She fled just as the front glass exploded inward. Frank bought her 10 seconds with his shotgun. It was enough. She burst out into an alley, running blindly. This was the brutal efficiency of a criminal organization in its death throes. They were cutting losses, and she was the most visible loose end. She had nowhere to go. Her stepfather knew all her old haunts. Leo's safe houses were compromised. She was alone in a city that had just become a hunting ground. But at the 30-minute mark, a different set of vehicles arrived downtown. Unmarked sedans and a black FBI SWAT van. They surrounded the hotel. Simultaneously, a female agent in a gray jacket pulled up to the curb near the alley where Maya was hiding. She didn't get out aggressively. She rolled down the passenger window and called out, Maya, my name is Sarah. Leo sent me. He said to tell you the orchids were his sister's favorite, the code phrase. The one detail Leo had shared with her in a moment of vulnerability. Maya, sobbing with relief and terror, stumbled into the car. The extraction was successful with 2 minutes to spare on Leo's deadline. The fallout was immediate and vast. With Leo in custody and cooperating, the FBI moved on Silas's operations simultaneously. Over the next 72 hours, they raided 12 properties, arrested 47 individuals, and rescued over 30 women and girls from active trafficking situations. The stepfather was picked up at a bus station, trying to flee with a suitcase full of cash Silas had given him. Voss was apprehended at a private airport. The international consortium, faced with the exposure of their financial ties to terrorism, collapsed as banks froze assets and governments launched investigations. Leo's dead man's switch data was the key that unlocked a global money laundering operation spanning 3 continents. But the legal process was complex. Leo, despite his cooperation, faced a mountain of charges. He had, after all, built a criminal empire. His defense attorneys argued that his actions, while illegal, were ultimately in service of a larger justice. They presented the evidence of his sister's case, his secret rescue network, and his ultimate sacrifice. The prosecutors argued that vigilantism couldn't excuse years of crime. In the end, Leo cut a deal. He pled guilty to racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy, and in exchange for his full cooperation and the dismantling of the consortium, he received a 25-year sentence, with the possibility of parole in 15. He was sent to a medium-security prison, where he reportedly runs a literacy program for inmates. Maya's stepfather was prosecuted under federal trafficking statutes. The evidence against him was overwhelming, including Maya's testimony and Leo's records of the original buyout. He received a sentence of life without parole, a landmark verdict that highlighted the severity of familial trafficking. At the trial, Maya faced him from the witness stand. When asked if she had anything to say to him, she simply said, "You don't get to be my father anymore." It was the final severing of the trauma bond that had held her for so long. Maya, now a protected witness, entered a long-term survivor program. With therapy, she finished her education. But here comes the final, surprising detail that reframes the entire story. Maya didn't just rebuild her life. She used her settlement money from a victim's compensation fund to start a non-profit, not a shelter, a detective agency. Named Anna's Orchids, it employs former law enforcement and survivors to investigate cold cases of missing persons, specifically focusing on familial trafficking patterns that traditional police work often overlooks. Her first solved case, she and her team re-examined the evidence in the death of Leo's sister, Anna. Using contemporary genetic genealogy techniques on old evidence, they identified the killer, a mid-level enforcer in a rival gang who had been killed in a shootout years earlier. She brought the closed case file to Leo in prison. He wept. For the first time, he had closure. Today, Maya runs Anna's Orchids, which has helped locate over 24 missing persons and secure convictions in 8 cold cases. She occasionally corresponds with Leo, updating him on the work. The crime lord who bought her to save her and the girl who was sold to him became unlikely partners in a different kind of justice. The system didn't give them a fairy tale ending. It gave them a complicated, painful, but real resolution. The unimaginable happened. The victim and the villain together tore down the machine that created them, and from the wreckage, they built something that could save others. This is where our story ends and where the real work begins. So what does Maya and Leo's story actually tell us about the world we live in? It tells us that the most dangerous predators often wear the mask of protector, that the statistic we opened with 40% of victims first sold by family isn't just a number. It's a blueprint for a specific kind of horror, one that thrives in silence and twisted loyalty. Familial trafficking remains the most underreported and most psychologically complex form of modern slavery because it weaponizes the very bonds that should mean safety. The victim's home becomes the crime scene, and their survival instincts are turned against them. Maya's journey from victim to asset to witness and finally to investigator proves a devastating point. Sometimes the system is so broken that justice requires working from the outside in, and sometimes from the inside out. Leo's path shows that redemption isn't about being innocent, it's about what you choose to do with your guilt. Their alliance, born from betrayal and forged in mutual desperation, highlights a painful truth. In the shadows where traditional systems fail, unconventional alliances can become the only lifeline. But this isn't a call for vigilantism. It's a stark reminder that for every survivor who finds an unlikely protector, thousands more never escape the first betrayal. The work of organizations like Anna's Orchids is critical because they operate with a survivor's intuition, understanding the patterns that others miss. They know that the paper trail isn't always in financial records. Sometimes it's in family photo albums, in school absentee reports, in the subtle shifts in a child's behavior that only another survivor would recognize as a cry for help. This is the legacy of Maya's unimaginable experience, turning the specific knowledge of her trauma into a tool to dismantle similar machines of abuse. But the lingering question for all of us is this: how many Mayas are still waiting in plain sight? How many children are living in homes where love has been replaced with ledger entries, where a parent's touch is a transaction? The answer is in the awareness we choose to cultivate. It's in recognizing that trafficking isn't just a problem of dark alleys and foreign countries. It's a domestic issue, a family issue, and it requires us to look at the people we trust and ask harder questions. This story challenged the simple narrative of monsters and heroes. In the real world, saviors have criminal records and victims become warriors. Evil wears business suits and redemption serves 25 to life. The only clear line is the one we choose to draw between exploitation and empathy, between looking away and bearing witness. If this story changed your understanding of what survival looks like, of where true danger lies, then you've already taken the first step. That awareness is the most powerful tool we have. Share this knowledge, stay curious about the uncomfortable stories, and remember, sometimes the most extraordinary tales of human resilience are hiding in the most ordinary places, waiting for someone to finally see. Thank you for watching until the end. If you want to dive deeper into stories that challenge the expected, that explore the complex shades of human nature, make sure to subscribe. Your curiosity fuels this search for truth. Until next time.